Ohio, 2009. A cold case that haunted a quiet Midwestern town for over a decade has finally been solved. 7-year-old Noah Benjamin Claybourne, a bright-eyed second-grade student known for his love of dinosaurs and sidewalk chalk drawings, vanished without a trace on a chilly October afternoon. His backpack was found near a wooded trail, but Noah never came home. Despite community searches and countless interviews, the case went cold. Leads dried up. Whispers of police missteps only deepened the family's heartbreak. But now, in a stunning twist fueled by a breakthrough in forensic technology, an arrest has been made and the truth may finally come to light. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Millfield, Ohio in 2009 was the kind of town where trouble rarely found a foothold. Nestled between patches of forest and farmland, it was a place where time moved slow and families grew roots deep. Neighbors waved across picket fences, kids rode bikes until dinner, and most people knew each other by name, or at least by their front porch. Noah Benjamin Claybourne was a familiar face in Millfield, especially to those who lived within a few blocks of Sycamore Street. Just 7 years old, he was the kind of child who left traces of joy wherever he went, sometimes quite literally, in the form of chalk drawings on sidewalks, happy stick figures holding hands beneath blue skies. His parents, Melissa and Brian Claybourne, had grown up in Millfield too. High school sweethearts, they had returned after college to raise their children close to family and far from big city noise. Their home was modest but filled with warmth, photographs lining the walls, crayon marks on the corners of the kitchen table, and always the faint sound of children laughing in the backyard. Noah was the youngest of two, with an older sister named Emily who often played the part of protector and playmate. Together, they turned their backyard into a castle, a jungle, and sometimes a spaceship. Their swing set, a gift from their grandfather, became a centerpiece of their after-school hours. Noah, small for his age, had a huge imagination that made the ordinary feel magical. At school, Noah was known for being soft-spoken but endlessly curious. His teacher, Mrs. Rayner, would later recall how he once asked if dinosaurs had best friends. He was always the first to help classmates clean up spilled crayons or offer his snack when someone forgot theirs. "Gentle," she said. "You just don't meet many kids like him anymore." October brought cooler weather and the rustling of leaves across the sidewalks. Halloween decorations had begun to appear, and Noah was excited to go as a paleontologist. He had already picked out a khaki vest and toy magnifying glass. The day before his disappearance was like any other. He returned home from school, set his backpack by the door, and did his homework at the kitchen table. Melissa made him his favorite snack, apple slices with cinnamon, while Emily read a book nearby. Around 4 p.m., Noah asked if he could walk to the park trail a few blocks away. It was a spot he and Emily often explored, a narrow path winding behind the trees near the creek. Melissa hesitated. The sun was dipping lower and the air carried a chill. But the trail was nearby and Noah had been there countless times. "Just 30 minutes, she told him, "and be home before it gets dark." He smiled, grabbed his little blue hoodie, and walked out the door. That was the last time Melissa Claybourne saw her son alive. It was a moment she would replay in her mind for years. The decision to let him go, the trust in the safety of her neighborhood, the image of him walking away with his hood up, tiny feet hitting the sidewalk. In a town where so little ever went wrong, it didn't occur to anyone that danger might be waiting in the shadows of the trees, that somewhere along the familiar path, innocence could be stolen in silence. Noah's footsteps faded into the crisp autumn air. But what happened during those final moments of freedom? And who was waiting in the woods that day? October 15, 2009. It was the kind of afternoon Millfield, Ohio was known for. Cool, golden, and quiet. The sun filtered through the thinning canopy of trees, casting long shadows over sidewalks littered with fallen leaves. Halloween was just 2 weeks away. Children were buzzing with costume plans and candy dreams. The town was alive but calm. At 4:03 p.m., Noah Benjamin Claybourne left his home in his favorite blue hoodie, hood pulled over his soft brown curls. He waved to his sister Emily as he stepped off the porch and turned toward the familiar dirt trail behind Alder Park. A short walk, one he had made many times before. His mother, Melissa, watched him go, unaware it would be the last time she'd ever see him. When 5 came and went, Melissa wasn't immediately alarmed. Noah sometimes lingered, collecting rocks or marveling at bugs along the path. But by 5:30, concern crept in. She walked the trail herself, calling his name into the quiet woods. By 6:15, her voice was shaking. Emily helped check the park. Still nothing. At 7:04 p.m., Melissa called the Millfield Police Department. "My son went for a walk and hasn't come back," she said, her voice breaking. "His name is Noah. He's only 7. The response was immediate. Officers arrived with flashlights. Within the hour, dozens of neighbors joined the search. The wooded trail was illuminated by bouncing beams of light and the urgent voices of people calling into the darkness. "Noah, Noah, it's okay, buddy, come out." Then, just before 8 p.m., a volunteer stumbled upon something chilling. Near the edge of the woods, less than 200 yards from the trailhead, lay Noah's backpack. It was zipped upright and resting neatly beneath a tree, almost as if it had been placed there deliberately. There were no rips, no signs of a struggle, no muddy footprints or tire tracks. Just silence, stillness. The discovery deepened the fear. What 7-year-old would leave their backpack behind without reason? By 9:30 p.m., search dogs were deployed. Helicopters hovered above the woods, shining spotlights into the dense brush. Officers used thermal imaging but found nothing. Volunteers pushed deeper into the forest. Some brought candles, others prayed. As midnight passed, the mood shifted from frantic hope to creeping dread. Melissa stayed near the park entrance, pacing, clutching a stuffed dinosaur from Noah's bed. "He wouldn't run off," she repeated. "He's scared of the dark." By morning, after nearly 14 hours of searching, there was still no sign of Noah. Not a shred of clothing, not a sound, not a single clue beyond the backpack. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Local television ran emergency bulletins. The Claybourne home became a staging area for volunteers. The school canceled classes. Counselors were dispatched. Church bells rang for prayer. The people of Millfield were shaken to their core. This wasn't just a missing child. This was a rupture in the town's sense of safety. A child had walked a familiar path and never returned. Parents began walking their children to school. Porch lights were kept on overnight. Strangers became suspects in the minds of neighbors, and the biggest question loomed over everything. If someone had taken Noah, how had they done it so quietly, so completely? How could a child disappear without a trace? In broad daylight? And if someone took him, where were they now? It was the 5th day since Noah Claybourne vanished, and Millfield was teetering between hope and heartbreak. Flyers were still being stapled to telephone poles. Candlelight vigils lit the town square each night, and volunteers walked miles of trails with flashlights, clinging to the belief that Noah might still be out there. But on the morning of October 20th, 2009, a pair of hikers veered off a marked trail near the outskirts of McKinley State Forest, nearly 4 miles from where Noah's backpack had been found. They were searching for bird nests and taking photos of autumn foliage when they noticed something unusual, a patch of disturbed brush, and beneath it, the faint outline of a small sneaker. They stopped. One moved the branches with a stick, and there he was. Partially concealed beneath a pile of leaves lying still in the hollow of the earth was the body of a small child. He was wearing a dirt-streaked blue hoodie. His hands were tucked close to his chest. His face was pale, serene, and lifeless. Authorities were called immediately. Within an hour, yellow crime scene tape surrounded the area. News helicopters circled overhead. The Claybournes were notified that a body had been found. Melissa collapsed. Brian, silent, stared at the wall for over an hour. Emily, only 10 years old, asked, "Does this mean he's not coming back?" The entire town felt the blow like a punch to the chest. But as horrific as the discovery was, what puzzled detectives most was what they didn't find. There were no signs of a violent struggle. No bruising, no blood, no obvious wounds. The ground wasn't disturbed beyond what nature might have done. It was as if Noah had simply lain down in the woods and gone to sleep. The medical examiner began work immediately. Toxicology was ordered. An autopsy was conducted, but initial findings were inconclusive. There were no fractures, no suffocation marks, no visible toxins in the preliminary blood work. The possibilities narrowed: poisoning, exposure, or suffocation. all hard to prove without clear physical evidence. Investigators began reconstructing a timeline. When was Noah last seen? Who was in the area? Could someone have moved his body after the initial search? The idea that his body had been deliberately hidden and only later placed in a more discoverable location began to gain traction. Had the killer watched the search and waited for the town to give up before disposing of the body? Dozens of people were re-interviewed. Parents, teachers, neighbors. Tips poured in from across the state, most of them dead ends. Suspicion began to settle on anyone who didn't fit. A local man with a criminal record was interrogated. A delivery driver who had passed through the area that day was tracked down. Even Brian Claybourne was quietly questioned. Standard protocol, but devastating nonetheless. Yet, with every path explored, the answers remained just out of reach, and without a cause of death, building a solid case became nearly impossible. Prosecutors needed evidence, not just tragedy, and what they had was a child gently placed in the woods with no signs of how or why he died. The media circled like vultures. Talk radio speculated wildly. Theories ranged from abduction to accident to something even more sinister. But inside the police department, the frustration was growing. The pressure to find answers clashed with the reality of an investigation built on uncertainty. Noah had been found, but the mystery surrounding his death had only deepened. If the autopsy couldn't explain how he died, then what really happened in those woods? The days following the discovery of Noah Claybourne's body were marked by grief, confusion, and a growing storm of frustration. The image of a small boy found lifeless in the woods had left an emotional crater in the heart of Millfield. But what followed was a chaotic and deeply flawed early investigation that only made the pain worse. Detectives from the Millfield Police Department, many of whom had never handled a homicide, were suddenly at the center of a high-stakes case with national attention. The pressure to find answers, and fast, was suffocating. They began by assembling a list of potential suspects. At the top was a local groundskeeper who had a prior conviction for child endangerment, though it was over a decade old. He worked near the park and had no solid alibi. Detectives brought him in for questioning. But his timeline checked out. No evidence placed him near Noah's route that day. He was released. Next, they questioned a reclusive man who lived in a trailer a few blocks from the trail, a known loner who often wandered the woods. A neighbor claimed he had seen the man near Alder Park the same afternoon Noah disappeared. But the man insisted he was out of town visiting family. Cell phone records backed him up. Even a distant relative of the Claybourne family came under scrutiny, a cousin who had recently returned to Millfield and had a shaky alibi. Police searched his property, questioned him repeatedly. Nothing. Each lead, once promising, collapsed under the weight of facts. But while police scrambled, the public's patience began to crumble. Rumors spread quickly. Some said key evidence had been left at the scene for days. Others claimed the initial search team had trampled potential clues. A woman who had reported seeing a suspicious vehicle near the park said no officer followed up on her tip. Her statement, she claimed, was lost in the shuffle. Candlelight vigils began to take a sharper tone. Parents demanded answers. Church leaders pleaded for transparency. Local news outlets started digging, and what they found raised eyebrows. Inconsistencies in the timeline, contradictory witness statements, and a growing sense that the case was slipping through the cracks. Melissa and Brian Claybourne, devastated by grief, became unlikely public figures. They stood in front of cameras, holding framed photos of their son. Melissa's voice shook as she accused the department of mishandling the case. "Our son is gone," she said, "and the people responsible for finding justice aren't doing enough." Brian demanded federal intervention. "We need outside help. We need real investigators, because we're losing time and we've already lost our child." Under mounting pressure, the local department made the call. The FBI was brought in 3 weeks after Noah's body was found. By then, it was almost too late. The crime scene, once sacred, had been compromised by weather, wildlife, and well-meaning volunteers who had trampled paths and shifted branches during initial searches. Potential trace evidence was gone. Whatever might have been left on Noah's clothes or near the burial site had degraded in the cold October rain. The FBI reviewed the file and found gaps. Witness interviews were inconsistent. The physical evidence was limited, and there was still no definitive cause of death. It was clear to federal agents the clock had been ticking from day one, and now they were starting from behind. The Claybourne family, once hopeful, now faced a grim reality. The trail was fading, and the person who had taken Noah might already be long gone. Would any real evidence survive, or had the killer already slipped away for good? In the months after Noah Claybourne's death, the investigation slowed from a sprint to a crawl. Leads that once seemed promising fizzled into dead ends. Suspects were cleared. Tips that poured in during the first frantic weeks dwindled to almost nothing. The case that had once commanded statewide headlines began slipping off the front page, replaced by newer tragedies and fresher scandals. Inside the Claybourne home, time froze. Noah's small bedroom remained exactly as it had been the day he left. His drawings, colorful scenes of dinosaurs and rocket ships, stayed taped to the wall. His sneakers still sat under the bed. Melissa Claybourne refused to move his things. "This house isn't whole anymore," she told a local reporter during one of the first anniversaries. She slept with his favorite stuffed dinosaur tucked under her arm, a fragile ritual she couldn't break. Brian Claybourne coped differently. Withdrawn and quiet, he began spending more nights at work or alone. The marriage, once built on small-town dreams, cracked under the strain of grief and unanswered questions. Within 3 years of Noah's death, the couple separated. Melissa stayed in the family home. Brian moved to an apartment across town, both of them carrying the same wound in silence. The investigation didn't fare much better. Detectives were rotated off the case, reassigned to new crimes with fresher evidence. Files were boxed and stored on a shelf labeled "Cold Cases Unsolved." Budget cuts meant fewer resources. Requests for additional DNA testing were denied. By 2014, the Claybournes' calls to the police department went unanswered for weeks at a time. In Millfield, the once vivid memory of Noah's disappearance began to fade into a kind of communal ache. The candlelight vigils continued every October, but each year fewer people attended. A handful of neighbors, some classmates, and a local pastor still gathered at the park with photos and candles, saying his name aloud. "We won't forget," they whispered. But the world outside Millfield already had. Melissa never stopped pushing. She wrote letters to state officials, contacted nonprofit groups, and begged for new testing as technology advanced. Each time she was told the same thing: no funding, no progress. For the investigators still quietly haunted by the case, Noah's file became a symbol of unfinished business. A small boy's face staring up from a dusty folder, a reminder of a promise unfulfilled. Years turned into a decade. Noah's sister grew up. His classmates graduated high school. New developments rose where the woods once stood. Life moved on, but the Claybournes remained locked in 2009. Then in late 2022, something changed. A newly formed cold case unit in Ohio began reviewing old files using modern forensic techniques. They were small, underfunded, but determined. One of the investigators, a young analyst fresh from training, pulled Noah's box off the shelf. Inside were the photographs, the evidence bags, the autopsy report that still read, "Undetermined cause of death." This time they saw it differently. Technology had evolved. Private labs now specialized in extracting degraded DNA from trace materials. There were grants available to fund new tests. For the first time in years, the Claybournes received a phone call from a detective. "We're looking at Noah's case again," he said. "We think we might be able to do something." Melissa gripped the phone and didn't speak for a full minute. After all this time, someone was finally opening the box again. But what made them take a second look? And could it finally break the silence that had hung over Noah's name for 13 years? In early 2023, more than 13 years after Noah Claybourne vanished from a quiet trail in Millfield, Ohio, a flicker of hope emerged from an unlikely place. A small, underfunded cold case unit in the state's Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Formed to tackle long-forgotten cases with modern tools, the unit partnered with a private forensic lab specializing in low-level and touch DNA analysis. Together, they began reopening dormant files. Noah's case stood out immediately. A 7-year-old boy, vanished in daylight, found in the woods, cause of death unknown, and no arrests. The evidence was limited, but not worthless. The team requested all materials associated with the case, including Noah's clothing, the zipper from his small blue backpack, and debris collected near the body. For months, scientists worked meticulously, using new extraction methods designed to isolate degraded DNA, even from heavily contaminated items. It was delicate work, slow and easily compromised. But in June 2023, a breakthrough came. On the metal zipper of Noah's backpack, the same one found near the trail just hours after he disappeared, a partial DNA profile was recovered. It was a mix of degraded skin cells, almost invisible, likely transferred through brief contact. It wasn't enough for a complete profile, but it was enough for a run through CODIS, the combined DNA index system. Weeks passed. The Claybourne family wasn't told. Investigators didn't want to raise false hope. Then, a name surfaced. Not someone from Millfield, not anyone from the original suspect list. The match belonged to a man in Michigan, arrested just months earlier for an unrelated parole violation. He had a criminal record, though nothing violent enough to trigger suspicion in Noah's case. His name was redacted in early communications. The cold case team referred to him only by initials as they began to dig deeper. First, they tracked his movements in 2009. Through archived employment records, hotel receipts, and cell tower data, they confirmed he had been in southern Ohio during the week Noah disappeared. A construction contract had brought him to a site just 15 miles from Millfield. Next, they reviewed his known addresses over the years. One of them, a rented trailer in 2009, was located less than 10 miles from the park where Noah vanished. Quietly, the cold case team began re-interviewing witnesses from the original investigation, especially those who had mentioned unfamiliar vehicles or strangers in the area that day. One retired resident remembered seeing a man standing near the woods smoking, watching kids play. She never saw him again. Her description, vague at the time, now aligned with the suspect's build and age. Another witness, a teenager back then, recalled a white pickup truck parked illegally near the trail that afternoon. Police had never located the vehicle, but the Michigan man owned a similar truck during that period. The cold case team built a timeline. A loose one at first, then tighter. They compared statements, cross-referenced traffic camera footage, and found digital traces that put the suspect within a few miles of Noah at the critical time window. The pieces, long scattered, began to take shape. But there was one question investigators couldn't answer with evidence alone. Was this man just someone who brushed against Noah's backpack on a random day, or was he the one who ended a child's life and buried him in the woods? Could science prove the connection, or had 13 years buried the final truth too deep to uncover? It was just after sunrise on a damp spring morning in April 2024 when a quiet knock echoed through the narrow hallway of a rundown apartment building in Lansing, Michigan. Inside, the man who answered was groggy but calm. He opened the door to find federal agents and Ohio authorities standing outside with a warrant in hand. Carl Dean Holloway, one of them said, "We need you to come with us." He didn't run. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded, stepped back, and allowed himself to be cuffed. It was over in minutes. Carl Holloway was 46 years old, a drifter with a long but mostly non-violent criminal history, petty thefts, vagrancy, minor drug charges. For years, he had floated between states, doing seasonal labor and taking odd jobs. His name had never appeared in the original investigation into Noah Claybourne's death. No one in Millfield knew him. And yet, the evidence now painted a damning picture. His DNA, recovered from the zipper of Noah's backpack using modern forensic techniques, had led investigators straight to him. And now, a match in the National Fingerprint Database confirmed the same. His prints were found, faint but present, on the backpack that had once held Noah's school papers and snack pack. News of the arrest spread quickly. The town of Millfield, long numbed by the years of silence, erupted in shock. Few recognized the name. Most couldn't understand how someone so completely unknown could be at the center of the town's deepest wound. "Who is he?" local reporters asked. "Why Noah?" In the Claybourne household, the phone rang before the headlines broke. A detective delivered the news personally. An arrest had been made in Noah's case. Melissa Claybourne wept. Her breath caught in her throat and she couldn't speak at first. "All I ever wanted was for his name to mean something again," she whispered. "That someone would care enough to finish the story. Brian Claybourne, more guarded, simply asked, "Are you sure it's him?" Investigators were confident. Holloway had been living in Ohio at the time of Noah's disappearance. His work records placed him just outside Millfield. Witness interviews now aligned with his presence in the area. The DNA and fingerprint evidence, though partial, was enough to move forward with charges. He was extradited to Ohio within days. The arrest made national news. Headlines read, "Cold case solved after 15 years. Arrest and murder of Ohio boy." TV anchors recounted the original disappearance, replayed interviews from 2009, and showed images of a smiling Noah in his school photo. But amid the relief, questions lingered. There was no known connection between Holloway and Noah. He had no relatives in Millfield. No criminal pattern involving children. Nothing in his history suggested a motive. Prosecutors remained tight-lipped. They had enough to charge him with murder, kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of a body. But the why remained elusive. Some believed Holloway had chosen Noah at random. Others feared there were things yet undiscovered in his past. In Millfield, the arrest was met with a strange mix of closure and new unease. The man responsible had finally been caught, but the story didn't feel complete. The Claybournes prepared themselves for what came next. Courtrooms, testimony, trial dates. They would see the man accused of killing their son face to face. They would have to relive every detail, but for the first time in 15 years they had a name. Carl Dean Holloway. A ghost who had haunted their lives from the shadows had finally stepped into the light. Would the trial reveal why Noah was targeted, or had the answers been buried with him all along? In January 2025, nearly 16 years after Noah Claybourne disappeared from a quiet Ohio park, the trial of Carl Dean Holloway began inside the Franklin County Courthouse. Snow fell gently outside as the courtroom filled with journalists, community members, and, most notably, the Claybourne family, all gathered to finally face the man accused of stealing a child's life. Holloway, now graying and stone-faced, sat silently beside his defense attorneys. He wore a suit jacket that didn't quite fit, his eyes rarely lifting from the table. To many watching, he remained a mystery, a man whose presence in Millfield was as brief as it was devastating. Prosecutors opened with a stark declaration. This is a case about science, about opportunity, and about a child who never made it home. They laid out the timeline piece by piece, starting with Holloway's presence in Ohio in October 2009, backed by employment logs and travel records. Then came the forensic evidence. Partial fingerprints on the backpack, trace DNA extracted using advanced touch DNA methods. Jurors listened closely as expert witnesses explained the evolution of DNA testing. What was impossible to identify in 2009 had become viable in 2023, thanks to new methods and machinery. A forensic biologist described how skin cells, invisible to the naked eye, could now be isolated, amplified, and matched against national databases. The prosecution also highlighted Holloway's inconsistencies. Interviews from his arrest revealed shifting stories, first claiming he had never heard of Millfield, then admitting he had passed through once. GPS records from a construction job contract placed him less than 10 miles from the trail the week of Noah's disappearance. The defense, meanwhile, offered a different narrative. They argued the evidence was circumstantial, that the DNA could have been transferred accidentally, that the backpack might have been contaminated during handling, or that Holloway had perhaps unknowingly come into contact with it in a public setting. They pointed to the lack of a motive, the absence of eyewitnesses, and the long gap between the crime and the arrest. But their arguments struggled to gain traction. Midway through the trial, Melissa Claybourne took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described the afternoon her son walked out the door. She clutched a drawing, Noah's last, a dinosaur under a rainbow with the words "I love you, Mommy" written in crayon. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the court reporter paused for a moment to compose herself. When the closing statements ended, the jury deliberated for just under 2 days. The verdict, guilty on all counts. Carl Dean Holloway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Claybournes, it was the closest thing to justice they would ever receive. But as the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, the mood wasn't celebratory. There were no cheers, no smiles, Only the quiet sound of tears, hugs, and whispered prayers. Justice in this case had come late, and at a devastating cost. Outside, Melissa told reporters, "We're grateful, but we're not healed. We can never be." Noah's sister, now 24, gave a statement of her own. "We got the truth, but we'll never get him back." The trial was over, but the lingering pain remained. The community, the investigators, the family, all were left to ask the same difficult question. What could have been done differently back in 2009? And what does this case truly say about justice delayed? In the quiet town of Millfield, Ohio, a child's memory has grown into something far larger than anyone could have imagined. Years after the trial that finally brought Noah Claybourne's killer to justice, his presence continues to ripple through the community, not just as a reminder of tragedy, but as a symbol of purpose, action, and hope. Each October 15th, the day Noah disappeared, Millfield now observes Noah's Day. What began as a small, informal gathering of neighbors and classmates has grown into a town-wide walk for awareness, honoring missing children and supporting families still waiting for answers. Children wear blue hoodies in his memory. Yellow balloons line the park trails where he once played. Parents gather in circles, some holding photos of their own lost children, others simply walking in solidarity. At Willow Creek Elementary, where Noah once sat in the front row of Mrs. Rayner's second-grade class, a special corner of the library bears his name, Noah's Nook. It's filled with books about dinosaurs, his favorite, alongside stories that teach empathy, courage, and kindness. A small plaque reads, "In memory of a boy who loved to learn, share, and smile." But the impact of Noah's story didn't stop at the city limits. Following the trial, Melissa Claybourne found herself pulled into a new chapter, one of advocacy. Though still grieving, she began speaking at forums, parent conferences, and law enforcement trainings. Her message was clear: no case should be forgotten, and no child should be left behind because of budget constraints or outdated technology. Through collaboration with other families of cold case victims, Melissa helped launch a statewide initiative calling for increased funding for unsolved child homicides. She met with lawmakers, attended hearings, and refused to let Noah's file fade into history again. Her efforts culminated in the passage of Noah's Law, bipartisan legislation signed in 2026 that mandates a baseline of annual funding for cold case investigations involving minors in Ohio. The law also provides grants for forensic testing and supports partnerships between public agencies and private labs, the same kind that helped crack Noah's case. Noah's story has since been used in training academies for detectives, in lectures on forensic science, and in national child safety campaigns. He is remembered not only as a victim, but as a turning point, proof that with persistence, innovation, and love, even the longest cold cases can thaw. But perhaps the greatest legacy of all lives in the hearts of those he touched. His sister, now a teacher herself, starts each school year by sharing Noah's story with her students, not to frighten them, but to remind them of the value of every child's voice. "He was more than a headline," she says. "He was my little brother. He deserved to grow up." Melissa still visits the trail sometimes, where the trees have grown taller but the pain remains close to the surface. She leaves flowers, sometimes a note. In an interview marking the 15th anniversary of Noah's disappearance, she was asked how she wants people to remember him. Her eyes filled with tears and she smiled. "He was more than a victim," she said. "He was our sunshine. And now he's the light leading others home." From a single child came a movement. From heartbreak came hope. And from silence, the promise that no child's name will ever be forgotten again. 15 years after the disappearance and tragic death of 7-year-old Noah Benjamin Claybourne, the truth finally came to light. Through determination, modern forensic science, and the relentless work of a new generation of investigators, the cold case that once symbolized loss and frustration was finally solved. The man responsible was identified, arrested and convicted, bringing long-awaited justice to a family and a town forever, changed by one October afternoon. But this case was never just about a conviction. It was about a little boy who loved dinosaurs and sidewalk chalk, about a family shattered, and a mother who refused to let her son become just another file in a locked cabinet. It was about community, memory, and the power of never giving up, even when the odds are long and the answers elusive. Noah's story is now taught in classrooms and forensic seminars. His name is spoken in courtrooms and state houses, and through Noah's Law and the annual Noah's Day, his legacy continues to spark change, fund justice, and protect children who still don't have answers. For every unsolved case, Noah's voice is a reminder: the truth is never too old to be found, and no child should ever be forgotten. This wasn't just a cold case solved. It was a promise fulfilled. For Noah, for justice, for every family still waiting for the light to break through,